Welcome to this week's edition of Dugout Dish Podcast. I'm Andy Kirikides, joined by my wonderful co-host, Keith Glasser. How we doing?
Great. How are you?
We're back at it with our college baseball roundup, if you will. We got our esteemed colleague, Mr. Jonathan Grasset, with us. What's going on?
What's up, guys? How are you?
Excited to chop it up about college baseball here for the next 45 minutes or so. We'll see what we uncover. Before we get into surprises and disappointments and stuff, I think me and Jonathan have to come to terms with a couple bad picks that we made on the front, a couple bad statements that we made on the front of this thing. So I'm going to go first. I had San Diego being a team to watch, coming off an awesome year last year. It just has not gone well. They played a super challenging schedule to start the season, and they've yet to get up from the butt kicking that they received early on. Looks like they're starting to play a little bit better, but they are not a tournament team unless they can win their conference tournament. So I'm going to wear that one. Not looking good. Yeah. So, Jonathan, I know you got to own up to one of your items too.
Going for everyone that's listening to the preview, it's the update that I had that Tennessee was going to have a hangover. Unless they've kept drinking or something, they have not. They're not hungover. There's no hangover in that building. TV's done a phenomenal job with a load of new players. They're not hungover. They're as good as ever. And I'll be honest, I think, and this is more of a credit to them, and I'll wear one on the chin. I don't have a problem with that. You're going to have bad takes when you do this stuff, but I think the job he's done this year may be better than the job he's done the last 2 or 3 years, which is wild to say. 3 years ago or 2 years ago, they won. When they lost to Notre Dame in the Super Regional, they were number one overall seed. I think they have 52 wins, 53 wins, something like that. Like, they obviously win a national championship. It's hard to top that, but like the job that staff has done this year may be more impressive than those other two. I mean, it has been incredible to watch what they've done. And again, we'll get to this in a second, but it seems to be they're in a class, with a few others in the SEC. But I mean, that staff has done an absolutely phenomenal job. I was listening the other night. I think they have 7 new guys in the lineup, and that does include some freshmen. And I think it's all 3 on the weekend are all brand new, not in Tennessee Orange last year. And they have not missed a beat, man. So credit to them. Good job. I don't know what I'm talking about, obviously. So we'll move on to the next.
Well, I think it's an interesting thing to discuss because, we're in this transfer portal era, and yeah, these guys can go out and quote unquote buy really good players and do all that kind of stuff. But I think it's another thing to go get good players. I think it's a more impressive thing to go get these players and get them to fit into a system, fit into a culture, and get them to play together, because Tennessee's that classic. I think they're one of kind of the outliers where they went and got a bunch of guys, or they're relying on freshmen, a lot of new faces, essentially, and they haven't missed a beat. There's a lot of programs out there that tried to do the same thing, and it ain't working. And I think it highlights the value of coaching, the value of culture, the value of getting guys to buy into what you are, what you believe in, the core tenets of your program. And obviously that's something that Tony's been able to do. I think LSU's another one. Texas, another one. Like, they went out and there's new faces, there's transfers, but they've got them in a place where they're playing really well, really polished. And I think there's a lot to be said about that. Like, there's a ton of talent running around college baseball, and there's a ton of talented rosters right now that are underachieving. And I think some of that has to do with that you are kind of putting together teams versus building a program to a certain extent. And I'm glad you highlighted it, because I think it's a lot more difficult than people would think on the outside. They're like, hey, we just go get a bunch of free agents who are really good and we'll put them together and they'll be awesome. Well, okay, yeah, but what happens when you get into the SEC and it starts to get really tough because everybody else is really good. You don't just win because you're good in that conference. You have to do the little things. You got to be tough. You got to be able to travel. And that doesn't come just because of pure talent. It comes because you have a culture, you coach really well, you understand how to get the most out of your guys. And I think that's going to be something to keep an eye on for the next couple of years is I think some of the really good coaches are going to separate themselves because they have the ability to win both ways, right? Building a program and then also being able to supplement with transfers and whatnot. So, yeah, interesting thing to think about off the top that it's not as easy as it looks for the people who are watching. Just to have a bunch of talent doesn't mean that you get to win a lot of games. So, some early takeaways here. Coach Glass, what do you got? Any surprises? Any disappointments? Any leading thoughts? What's your opening statement for this evening?
I think my two disappointments thus far, and I think one is the obvious one. All three of us had them in Omaha is Texas A&M. We don't have to beat that drum too long because I think that's getting beaten all over Twitter. But they're obviously the leading candidate for one of the biggest disappointments this year. I mean, they opened up as preseason number 1, and it has not gone well for the Aggies. They did have a big weekend last weekend against Tennessee, but overall it's been pretty tough. And I think the other one for me, you and I both had them, Andy, in going to Omaha is Oklahoma State, who hasn't really been what either of us kind of anticipated them doing this year. So those two, I would say, are probably the two biggest disappointments so far. I think the other thing, and Jonathan had asked me to do this, I do find it interesting. You know, we talked on the preview of the season show, the amount of travel that some of these teams are going to be undertaking. The 4 that we highlighted were BC traveling 21,000 plus miles, Rutgers 22, almost 23,000, Stanford 24, and Washington 24 and a half. And their records, right? So like we haven't necessarily seen this type of travel in really ever in college baseball. So BC traveling 21,000 miles. They're 17 and 18 and 7-11 in the ACC. Rutgers traveling almost 23,000 miles is 17 and 26 and 9. Stanford 24,000 miles traveled. They're 19 and 14 and 6 and 12 in the ACC. And Washington 24,500 is 18 and 19 and 9 and 6. We can debate the merits of, are these teams, where they should be, where they were, who knows? But I do think that it's with that amount of travel to be bordering around 500 / above, obviously the conference play in the ACC, I think is a little bit tougher than the Big Ten. And we'll probably get into that later. But BC being 7-11 in the ACC and 17 and 18, they're doing a phenomenal job there. And Stanford, 19 and 14, they're not having a great AC first run in the ACC, but, I don't think it's a coincidence that only one of those teams is above 500 conference-wise, and they're all bordering on 500. Stanford's the only one 5 games above 500 overall. I think this travel does take a toll on these kids, especially when 2 of those schools are actually really high-end academic schools in BC and Stanford that, these kids actually have to go to class in some semblance of the word in 2025. So I do think that that's playing a factor in some of the records that you see in those conferences there too. So those would be my 3 things that I'll open with tonight, and we're going to get into a lot more. I have all the stuff that we did from the preview show, so we'll bring it up as we go.
What are some of your hot takes, Jonathan?
Big thing for me is that I think there's a huge gap right now in terms of like the top end, and everybody else. I think just watching and kind of, talking to a lot of people, I think the days of the 4 seed getting out of a regional are probably over. It's just too hard for a lot of those mid majors to be able to compete because of the portal, because of the NIL stuff, because of all that stuff. Like I just feel like it's going to be very hard for those teams. And I think honestly, I think there's disparity in the leagues. Like I think I think the ACC is a perfect example. I think the ACC's got a couple of teams at the top, but I don't know what the rest of the league looks like. And then you even go one step further and you go to the ACC. I mean, I think there's a tier system in the ACC or the SEC too. I think you look at Texas, you look at Tennessee, you look at Arkansas. I think and I know LSU didn't play great this last weekend, but I think you could put them potentially in that mix. Like, I think there's a clear cut top tier there, and then there's everybody else. So I think that'll be interesting to kind of see how it plays out. And obviously we're only 15 games in, in the SEC, and I think we're 18 in the ACC, depending on, the final stuff with their buys. But I think you look at, there's really a tiered system here, and the haves have it, and the have-nots is everybody else in all reality. And especially competing for a national championship. I think I'll put it this way. I don't think what we saw in basketball with 4 number 1 seeds is going to be much different than we're going to see in Omaha here in the next, 2.5 months or so.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out. And the matchups for the super regionals and stuff will obviously dictate quite a bit of that. But I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think there's a couple teams that are seemingly kind of in a class of their own right now. The one team that they just keep winning, they keep climbing the ladder. It's not a star-studded group. They've got the Canarella kid playing center, who's like a legit prospect. They got the Nat kid they're going to run out on Fridays every night, and he can beat anybody in any day. It's Clemson. And they don't have a ton of like high-end pro prospects like some of these other rosters. Like if you look at D1 baseball's like top 150, Canarella is the only guy in this year's draft class who's considered to be like a top 3 or 4 round type of talent. But they just keep winning. And I think it's clear that Coach Bakich is extremely good at what he does, taking Michigan to a College World Series final. Clemson hasn't never been able to get over that hump, right? The only ACC team to ever win a national championship is Virginia. Are they good enough? It's going to be really cool to see when they go head-to-head with some of these SEC teams that, on paper and look like they're better, to see if Clemson can match up with them. That's something I'm really looking forward to come tournament time is this Clemson team. And I think they're a true definition of a team when you look at how they're winning games. Like it's a long lineup. It's not super star-studded, but it's a lot of guys who are really good at playing baseball. They play really hard. They compete at a super high level, and their bullpen's really good. The team that I'm probably most disappointed in, and I don't think they're getting in the tournament. They have an opportunity to because they have built-in RPI being in the ACC. But Virginia is probably one of the biggest disappointments for me in terms of what they've been able to do so far. I think they're 85 or 86 in the RPI right now. A couple road ACC wins can change that big time, and they could get themselves into that top 50, and then you start to get in the conversation of being an at-large. But I think when you look at the amount of talent that they're running out there offensively this year, I think they've been let down a little bit by the pitching. But they're probably one of my biggest disappointments. I think one of the cool surprises is we do have a couple mid-major teams that are making some noise. Like this Western Kentucky team is pretty fun to watch. And I'm curious to see if they're going to be able to keep riding it the way that they are, being 30-5, and they got some athletes. I mean, their center fielder is all kinds of tooled up and does some really impressive things on a baseball field. I'm really curious to see when they get in the tournament, which I think at this point is probably a lock for the most part, to see if they can make some noise in a regional as a 2 or a 3 seed. But I think to your point, Jonathan, it's going to be a lot of chalk. And I think that 4 seed stuff's going to be tough. I'm not sure if we're going to see much of that moving forward because I do think that the gap has continued to grow pretty significantly. And I think it made a big jump this year. That top upper echelon of college baseball has really, really separated itself from some of the mid-major programs that in the past have been able to go into regionals and make some noise. So I did a little bit of a breakdown, right? And I want to walk through this because I think it'd be good education for folks who maybe don't watch college baseball that much. But I went through every single conference, looked into the RPIs, and I think the crux of this conversation comes around after we go through this, how many ACC and how many SEC teams end up getting in. But we'll take it conference to conference here, right? You've got the American Athletic. Texas San Antonio is the only at-large team in that conference right now. So that's like a prime candidate to steal a bid. The American East is a one-bid league. The A10 is a one-bid league. The Atlantic Sun's a one-bid league right now. Big 12's looking like 6. Big East is possibly a 2-bid league. Big South is 1. I got the Big 10 penciled in for 4. I think we might be able to discuss a little bit around that. The Big West is 2. CAA is a 1-bid league. Conference USA is a 2-bid league. Horizon, Ivy League, MAC, Missouri Valley, Mountain West, Northeast, Ohio Valley, they're all 1-bid leagues. SoCon's a 1-bid league. Southland's looking like a 2-bid league. SWAC 1, Sunbelt 3, Patriot League, Summit, West Coast, WAC are all 1-bid leagues, which leaves us with 21 potential at-larges between the ACC and the SEC. And I think the biggest question mark is like how many of these SEC teams are going to get in? I think it's going to be 13. I just think there's so much depth in that conference that it's going to be hard to validate taking an at-large, especially if a couple of these bids get stolen. But what are your thoughts on this one, Keith?
13 is such a high number. Like, and the wild part is I don't know if I necessarily disagree. But 13 just seems so dang high. Like, I mean, I think you can definitely make an argument for at the very least 10 to 11. I think obviously, and I don't want this to seem like a cop-out answer, I think a decent amount of this is going to shake out obviously over the course of, we're at the midway point. We still have another 4 or 5 weeks left, plus the tournament, what that looks like. I think there's at least 2 teams in the SEC that have 0 shot. And then there's another 3 that I think are fringy, and then I have 3 to 4 that are fringy. But I mean, it's the SEC, and I hate this narrative, but like I think that it's becoming ever apparent that this is the premier best baseball conference in college baseball, and you can't necessarily, ding it. And I think, kind of the precedent was set last year. We sat on here multiple times asking why Florida was continually ranked and Florida shouldn't have gotten in. And then they go to Omaha and have a really good playoff run. And I think, for us as coaches, when we talked about it, it was more like your body of work from the season didn't necessarily warrant the fact that you should have had that opportunity, right? Like, there's no denying that there was talent all over that field and they were really good at baseball, but they hadn't necessarily done it on the field in wins and losses. So I think it's interesting. Like, I could be way off. I just think 13 is incredibly high. The problem, and we can probably discuss this further, is who's going to take other bids. You know what I mean? Like, and I mean that from the standpoint of like, are there like the mid majors? I don't think are going to have enough they're not going to have the RPI. They're not going to have the wins and losses to be able to overtake some of these, the big dogs out of the SEC, which I think, by default puts more ACC, SEC teams into the tournament. So while I don't necessarily I guess in summation, I don't think that there's good, it could be 13. I don't know if the bottom 3 warrant actually being in, but I certainly think that they're better than other teams that might have a little bit of a better record, but haven't necessarily beat anybody, right? Like you go win 10, 11, 12 games in the SEC, you had a pretty good year.
I think the biggest thing too is I don't totally disagree with you, Keith. I think 12, I feel comfortable with 12 in right now. I think their body of work plays that 12 play. That I'm cool with that. I think the interesting part is that you could potentially have Missouri go 0-30 in the SEC, which is wild, number one. But and number two, when you go through these schedules, in the past when the SEC had 14 teams, for everybody that's watching this, right? That doesn't follow super close like we do. The SEC had 14 teams for forever. You had to get to 13 wins and you were in. Basically, if you were 13, I think it was 98%. I think one team, Andy, you said that yesterday when we were on our group chat. I think 13 wins basically got everybody in. 12 was I think it was 50-50 if you got the 12 wins, and most of those were depending on what you did in Hoover in the tournament. Well, the SEC now goes to 16 teams. You had Texas and Oklahoma, which both seemingly at this point seem to be automatic, and Texas is going to probably be a national seed. The SEC tournament, though, now is basically win in advance. Everybody gets in. All 16 get in, and then win in advance. And the top 4, I believe, get 2 byes. Top 8 get 1 bye. And then 9 to 16 they have to play on that Tuesday. What does the committee deem acceptable with now 16 teams, potentially a team going 0-30 in that league? Because let's say you get to 13 wins, but you have 3 against Missouri, and you lose opening round in the tournament, does that get you in? On paper, it should, but what about the 12 or 11 win team? There's been teams in the past that have had 11 wins that have been very close to getting in the SEC. What does that look like now with the team that goes 0-30 and you lose opening round in Hoover? I think to say there's going to be 13 from the SEC or 14 from the SEC or even 12 from the SEC that get in, I think it has more to do with, what do the records look like? And then what is the committee saying, hey, this is our new barometer in the SEC for teams to get in? Is it 12 wins? Is it 13 wins? Will they consider an 11-win team? Because that will determine more of how many they actually get in and how many they don't get in. Because I think just to say, hey, they're going to probably get 13. Okay, well, I'm comfortable right now today, 15 games into the SEC season, with 12 very comfortably getting in. I don't think there's much of an argument for those top 12. I think the bottom 4, I think you could play. The 13th, I don't know who you would go with. I think it probably has to do with this Florida figure out a way to turn it on. I don't think Mississippi State or South Carolina is going to figure it out. But, you look at it that way and you say, all right, hey, I think they can get 12 or 13. But, I still if team 13 has 10 wins, you can't put team 13 in. Right?
Yeah.
You're going to put a team that's 10-20 in conference that loses on opening night in Hoover?
No, I don't think so.
So I think that has more to do with it. Is how many get to 12? I think that's the way to look at it. Is how many get to 12? Because if you get to 12, I think you have a really good argument and the committee can kind of stand on, well, it's the SEC, then you can put however many that is that get to that number.
I mean, but think about this, right? I'll play counterpoint to you. Florida is 4. Trying to do the math here. They are 4-11 in the SEC right now. They're 30th in the RPI. And like that's where this gets squishy, is that you can be a bad SEC team and you're still, when you do the math across the board because of the built-in strength of schedule and the fact that the out of conference, like Florida's 20-3 non-conference with wins against Florida State and Miami, like, so they're smashing these other schools, but they're not playing well on the weekends. Like, where do you pass your judgment? And I think that's what we ran into last year when we were talking about them, is like at the end of the day, the body of work's not that impressive because ultimately you get judged by what you do in the SEC. But is the SEC that much better than everybody else where it just kind of doesn't matter? And I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but it is kind of telling that you can be 4-11 in that conference right now. And if you were to look at it today, RPI wise, like it would be hard to argue that they shouldn't be in. But at the end of the day, they're one of the worst teams in the SEC right now. That's the tricky part about that conference, right? And I think it's less tricky with the ACC at this point. And I think that the conversation might end up coming down to, right, just say no major bids get stolen, right? There'll be a couple, I'm sure. But say you get down to 19 spots for the ACC and the SEC. Are you taking the 13th best SEC team over the 9th best ACC team? Like, that's kind of what I think the conversation comes down to. And I don't know the exact answer, but I would probably side with the SEC in that. Like, I don't think the ACC is particularly strong this year. I think you have 3 really good teams. I think Clemson, Florida State, and North Carolina are 3 really good baseball teams. I don't know if anybody else is really good.
Well, I think
they're varying colors of good, but I don't think anybody's great.
Georgia Tech's 29-7.
I mean, yeah, and Louisville. I mean, Louisville's played pretty damn good. They played a pretty good schedule. I mean, they got Kentucky on the midweek. Like,
but if you watch those guys, I don't know if they jump off the page though. That's kind of what I'm getting at. And yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I don't disagree with you. But I also don't think that Louisville and Georgia Tech fall into that 8 or 9 spot in the ACC. I think you're talking more about, the Dukes, the Virginia Techs, the NC States.
Yeah. And
the Wake Forest, like, I mean, Wake Forest is another bad weekend away from it having to kind of climb back into this thing.
Oh, without a doubt.
I don't disagree with you. And me and you had this conversation, I think about 2 weeks or a week and a half ago. Like, even Clemson and Florida State and North Carolina, like, where do they shake out if you say, hey, let's just throw them in the SEC? I mean, like, yeah, of course, I would say mid-tier, 4 or 5, somewhere in that range, 6, But we've seen teams in that tier win the whole thing too. So I think there's also something to be said about that. Like, Ole Miss backed their way in. They were, seemingly Team 64 to get in, a few years ago. They won the whole thing. So, like, I get that argument. And I get that, point. It just feels like there's 4 teams at the top, and it just seems like, to me, there's everybody else. And I'm not saying that those 4 are the only 4 that can win the national championship, because we know how this works. Like, we've seen this. But right now, when you watch them on, every day and a few times a week, there just seems to be a different class outside of those 4, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think the other thing too is, and we talked about this probably 2 weeks ago, or maybe even this week. I don't even know. I feel like the ACC, there's a top of the ACC, and then everyone else is good but not great, which is why you're seeing the 500 records where because they're just beating each other up because they're all in that same kind of mold of being a really good baseball team, but they're not great. Where the SEC, I think you have a clear, the top five teams in the SEC haven't even gotten to double digit losses yet. Like LSU is the most losses, and and then Georgia, and they have 6. Like Tennessee, Arkansas, and Texas all have 5 losses. What are we doing? And Auburn, Ole Miss, Alabama, and Vandy are all they're having good years. I mean, Alabama has single digit losses, and they're in 7th or 8th in the conference. So that's why I balk when we bring do I think that Oklahoma should be in? Yeah, but you start getting to below 5 severely out 4 games below 500 at this point in the year is not the worst thing in the world conference wise. But I just wonder what are they going to value when they get to the select? What is the selection committee value when you get to it? If you're 12 and 18 in conference, is that okay? Is that enough? And I have to make a decision today. I think that is enough. But I think that's why there's a disparity. I don't think I think the ACC is way more top heavy, and everyone else in the middle to the bottom is just is good, not great, and just an average for the ACC baseball team, right? Because you take those teams and put them against some of the you've seen them play midweek against other teams they're boat racing people left and right, But you get into that conference, it's tough sledding. That's how I feel about the ACC. I mean, I could be dead wrong, but, I still think it's a really good conference. I just think the middle of it this year, more than in years past, is a lot more, they're all kind of the same team. And that's why you're seeing 9-9, 9-9, 10-8, all the way down for, 7-11, because they're all kind of the same team. And, those games are all 1-run games. You watch enough ACC baseball on the weekends and SEC baseball, they're tough game. I mean, Arkansas, Georgia was a barn burner on Sunday night. What'd they go, 12 or 13? What a great game to watch. But these games are battles. And I think that plays up when you get to selection time too. Arkansas lost the series, but what that game, that third game was a legit coin flip that went 13 innings. You're not getting dinged for losing that series.
That's the crazy thing about the SEC is that week in and week out, things can change so quick. A&M was hung out to dry 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. Well, they win a series at Tennessee. They go and absolutely blow the doors off of South Carolina this weekend. They're going to be in the mix. It's crazy to think, but they might be this year's Florida where they figure it out and they're the last team you want to see come tournament time. But then you look at a team like Arkansas, they close out the season with Texas, LSU, and Tennessee. They could play their butts off and go 3-6 to close out the season. It's such a wild conference and things can change so quick. And that's kind of the beauty of it, right? But it also is the thing at the end of the year where is the goal to get the best 64 teams in, or are you going to weigh how you stack up against your competition in your conference a little bit more heavy? Because if you're trying to get the best 64 teams in, then basically South Carolina and Missouri are the only 2 teams that shouldn't be in the tournament. I don't know if that's the spirit of it, but obviously.
Yeah, but I think that's where we're going.
Yeah, right? It's going to become so hard that unless these mid majors really schedule really well, and you go out and you really challenge yourself in the beginning of the year, you challenge yourself midweek, you're just not going to be able to keep up with what's needed in terms of what those wins and losses are. Like we were going through it earlier, there's really good ball clubs that are 30-8 that they're one bad conference weekend away from having zero chance of getting in this thing because they just do not have enough built into their schedule to overcome one bad weekend. You can have 4 bad weekends in the SEC and you're good to go.
Right. I think the hard part, and we've talked about this before, I think the hard part is it's twofold. You have some schools that don't want to schedule those mid-majors because there's no benefit. If they beat them, they're supposed to. If you lose, it can ding you. I think the other thing is that if you start looking around the country at the mid-majors and what you can do scheduling-wise to boost your RPI, it gets pretty tough in a good portion of the country. Like if you're in the Northeast, like there's only a select few schools that you can play midweek that are going to give you a boost from a strength of schedule standpoint. And especially nowadays, like, what are you going to do? Go travel 6, 7, 8, 9 hours to play a midweek game on a Wednesday? I mean, do I think it's out of the question in 3, 4, 5 years? No, I don't. But right now, that's not in the cards for a lot of these schools. I mean, Kansas State's flying into play. Well, who are they playing? Northeastern and a couple other teams this weekend. But I don't know that, like, it is, can Marist can't go travel down to North Carolina on a Tuesday to play UNC or name said school that they could go play. You know what I mean? Like that's a 10, 11 hour trip for, so I feel like you're bound geographically by what you can do. And unfortunately that's going to ding you in the long run. But I also I also think some people don't want to play those games. And that's a bigger conversation that we're probably going to start seeing games get whacked here in the coming weeks. But I don't think people they don't want to schedule those games, especially later in the year, because it's like, if we're a borderline on the bubble team and we play this team, like there's no benefit to us winning, and there's a huge benefit there's a huge detractor from us losing. So why even risk it?
I think you're too, because the other part too is that the teams that are on the bubble like that, like you make a great point. The teams that are on the bubble like that, their budgets can handle just paying the fee to that school to back out of the contract. So it's like there's literally nothing, like there's no repercussions for it. It's just you just walk into your boss's office and you say, we're not playing this game because it could potentially cost us to get into the tournament. And that school has no problem writing that check for canceling that game for absolutely no reason. And you don't even need to do anything. We're not playing. Thanks anyway.
Yeah. Literally all you have to do. We'll pay you. Thanks. Not playing. And, you could say field conditions, you could say whatever the hell it is you want to say. But, I think that's where, under the current setup, I think that's where mid-majors are taking it on the chin because they don't have, it's getting increasingly harder to schedule to increase your RPI. And especially geographically, and Jonathan's point about budgets, like if you're a Northeast New England school, I mean, you can throw a dart at a map and find a school within an hour and a half to 2 hours that you can go play midweek wise, where it gets a little bit more difficult in other parts of the country. Like it's built into your budget where you have to go travel 4, 5, 6 hours because there's not as many teams geographically for you to play midweek, because probably the closer schools are all conference games that you're not going to schedule midweek to play anyways, and I think that's where it gets a little bit more difficult, and I honestly, I don't know if it moves the needle. I think it moves the needle in a CAA, in a Conference USA, in the Sun Belt, things like that, right? Like, I don't know if it's going to move the needle in the MAC, in the NEC, in the Patriot League, and it's not a knock on those conferences by any stretch of the imagination. It's just it's not going to really move the needle. I mean, the only Fairfield in my 20 plus years of following this. Like Fairfield's the MAC was a 2-bid league once when Fairfield went like 42-8 a couple years ago. But that's an outlier. That's not something that's going to happen year in and year out. And I think that's where, I certainly think if people are willing to play you, it can work to your benefit. But I think there comes a point in time where like they're not necessarily going to want to play you, because at the end of the year, your RPI is going to be dinged by the bottom end of your conference, which if you beat them and win the series, it's going to hurt them in turn as it goes. So I think that's the one thing that amongst a lot of things, but one of the things that I think works against the mid majors is that scheduling aspect of it, where like you just don't have the opportunity that these other schools have to be like, shoot, if you're Troy, we haven't even touched about Troy. Troy's unbelievable this year, but look at their midweeks. They went up and played Virginia Tech before they played JMU in conference. They're playing Alabama twice. They played Auburn, played Mississippi State. Like, that's not like schools in the Northeast don't necessarily have that opportunity to do that and play all those schools and boost their RPI and give themselves an opportunity to have that as part of their schedule. Right. So like, I think that's one of the things, especially for the Big East, a CAA, like those type schools where you don't necessarily get that opportunity. And, unfortunately, it's just the way of the world when it comes to what we're doing in college baseball right now.
I think you bring up some Northeast teams and you get into this conversation of, with Northeastern is kind of a prime example of, if you're one of those teams who expects to be an at-large team, you don't really want to play Northeastern at the beginning of your year because they can go in and beat you. So I think it might even be hard for some of those schools that are in that category in the Northeast. UConn would be another one that like, you don't really want them rolling in week 2 because you might like it might not end well. And Northeastern did that last year, and obviously they slipped up in the conference tournament, which is part of the conversation. But they went out and played Arizona and played them nails out there. Like if you're one of those teams that they're scary teams to play, and being in that region makes it so tough because if you're Northeastern, BC and UConn are really the only 2 teams that are going to move the needle for you midweek.
Yeah.
Really that simple. Like nobody else is moving the needle. Like there's good programs, but if you're Northeastern, you're supposed to go and beat Fairfield. As good as Fairfield is, like it's going to hurt your RPI if you lose to Fairfield.
Yes. But that's just the nature of the beast now.
Speaking of mid-majors, right, we got a couple of them that they're making some noise, right? I'll throw some names out there and let me know if any of these intrigue you in terms of being able to make some noise come tournament time. You got Cal Poly, who, if you were to cut it right now, like they're probably getting to host. Like there's a decent chance that they could host. They're 17 in the RPI. I think you probably get a little bit more host activity out west with UCLA and Oregon State in the mix to kind of do that kind of stuff. You got Cal Poly, you got Dallas Baptist, you got Texas San Antonio, you got Irvine, McNeese, Troy, Western Kentucky. All of those teams I just rattled off are in the top 32 in RPI right now. Do any of those guys stand a chance to make it? Are any of those teams got a chance to be super teams?
I think it's Troy, just kind of what Keith hit on with, their midweek. Like, you're going to be so battle tested in the Sun Belt. Plus you throw in that midweek's, group of scheduling that they have. Southern Miss twice, Alabama, I think twice, Auburn once, like went up to Virginia Tech. Like, they're groomed to win a regional. Like that's what that schedule does for you. The Sun Belt, on the weekends, plus that midweek. Maybe you have some cupcakes early on, they're pretty easy wins for them. But I just think when you test yourself like that on the midweek, plus you have that Sun Belt schedule, and you can say whatever you want about the Sun Belt. I mean, some of them might be down a touch this year compared to in years past, but not much. You know, I mean, they're the 6th ranked RPI in terms of conferences. Like, you look at it and you say, you know, they have really done a good job of testing themselves and going into regional type atmospheres, and you know, the committee won't do them any favors. They'll be a 2 seed and they'll have to go to like Auburn or somewhere, LSU or somewhere ridiculous. But you know, you play that in the midweek. You've done your job in the Sun Belt. In my opinion, you're going to be poised to win. I think their biggest thing is it's just going to be geographically. They're just going to be tough because they're going to put that somewhere as a 2 seed. That's going to probably be in the SEC.
That's a good point. I'm really curious to see if any of these West Coast teams, specifically Irvine and Poly, you get them in a regional. They both have a chance to host. Can they get out of it, right? Because last year we had 4 ACC and 4 SEC teams in the College World Series. Are we going to break that streak? Like, if you're going to ask me again right now to revamp it, you never know how it's going to line up. Like, you don't know who's going to match up in the supers and stuff, but like, it's probably 5 SEC teams and 3 ACC teams that are there. Who are some teams that might be able to break that trend of it basically being an ACC SEC battle for the title? Like, are there any Big 12 teams? Oregon State, maybe?
I think Oregon State can get there.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think you could see somebody in the Big 12. I mean, I know I've been on this train, you know, and we were joking about it, you know, earlier this week, but I think at West Virginia, I mean, West Virginia's 25-9 or something like that, or 29-5, I'm sorry. There's somebody, I think the Big 12 is, I don't think we're just going to see an ACC, SEC, you know, Omaha this year. I don't know. I could be wrong, but I think you're going to get somebody, Oregon State, a Big 12. I don't know if there's really anybody else out there. I don't know if good enough.
Not to cut you off, TCU has been playing well lately. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if TCU made a run. I mean, they're 28-9. Like, I wouldn't be shocked. Like, that's a team that, like, them in West Virginia, I think, out of the Big 12, you know, I had Oregon State, you know, I mean, I would suppose if we're talking about the Big 10, like, maybe a former Pac-12 team makes a run, but I don't think anyone traditionally from the Big 10 this year, right? Like, I mean, I could be wrong, but it doesn't seem that way. I mean, I think Cal Poly is super interesting because they had Hawaii at home and took 2 out of 3, and Hawaii was rolling. I certainly think they can host. I don't necessarily know if they get out of a super if they get matched with an SEC school. But I think the other thing, like, you know, the same, like the ACC, you know, I said it before, it's, you know, they're beating up on each other. Like, what does that look like come tournament time? Like, does beating up on each other actually prepare you for that type of tournament setting? Or is it just going to be another, you know, maybe they get beat by whoever the hell it is they're matched up with? But I don't think we're seeing SEC. I'm with Jonathan. I don't think we're seeing SEC, ACC, all Omaha this year.
Well, we're talking about Troy, and they won the series versus Coastal, which is 100%. That's meaningful. But Coastal's sitting 8 RPI right now. Like, can you think about this? Can you come in second in your conference and host over the first place team? Is there a scenario where Coastal finished second in the Sun Belt, but because of what they've done outside of their Sun Belt, could they host with Troy not hosting? Because right now, Coastal would host.
great question. I think that they probably could, given the disparity in RPI. Like Coastal's 8 and Troy's what, in the 30s? 32, 33?
32.
Somewhere in there.
That league, I think yes. I think yes. That the answer is yes.
Coastal would be an electric regional host, by the way. For those
but the thing with Coastal is that, and similar to Troy, I know you guys will agree with me on this, similar to Troy, their midweeks are legit. They're playing South Carolina, they're playing Clemson, they're playing, Wilmington, they're playing College of Charleston. Like, they're not playing, these cupcakes on a Tuesday where you can, justify saying, well, Troy's, and nothing against Troy's schedule. I just complimented on what they did with their schedule. But Coastal's playing a similar type of schedule. And if you just look at it and the way the RPI shapes out is that Coastal's higher, even though they're in second place. I don't have any problem with Coastal hosting. I don't think Coastal, even at 8 right now, they're at 8. I don't think they're a national seed because I think when you shook it all out, I think you would probably rank Oregon State and LSU higher than them, even though I know the RPI doesn't tell you that. And I think part of that also is that if they don't win, the Sun Belt, that you have to also account for that. But I have no problem with them being a host and Troy being a 2 seed. I would love if Troy got a 2 seed and didn't have to go to, a national seed, if Auburn's a national seed or LSU's LSU won't be a national seed, but if LSU's a national seed, even Georgia, like I would prefer them, to not put Troy with that and put them with, maybe that 11 to 16 range as the 2 seed. But, there's only so many 1 seeds you can hand out. There's only so many 2 seeds you can hand out.
I mean, you talk about the schedule, and I want to make another point after this, but like Coastal, 2 wins against Kansas State, a win against Washington, who, they're 19 and 18, but they're top 4 in the Big Ten right now. They go play Alabama. They beat NC State. They play Wilmington. They sweep Rutgers. They play North Carolina. They take 2 or 3 from ECU. They play Wake. They play Campbell midweek. They play Clemson midweek. They got to win there. They play Wilmington. They're going to play Wake Forest again. They're going to play – who playing Wake Forest right now? They play Charleston. Like, there's very few cakewalk non-conference games that they have on their schedule, right? They're probably the worst team that they played midweek on their schedule right now, looking at it real quick, is St. Joseph's, and St. Joseph's is the best team in the A-10. There's no cake there.
No, and I think it lends itself to, I think Jonathan was talking about earlier, like the tiers within even Division I college baseball. Like the Sun Belt is a phenomenal baseball conference in college baseball. But I also think Coastal won a natty in the not too distant past, but there's goes to kind of what I was talking about earlier. Like Coastal's also in a unique spot where they can play all of these teams midweek, and they are really good. They're in a really good conference, and everyone knows that they're in that unique spot because they're in that upper tier of what we would consider a mid-major school. Like, I don't even know if from a budget standpoint, they are, but they do everything first class there and they're really good. Right. So you go play Coastal, you schedule a midweek, no matter what, it's not going to hurt you win or lose because they schedule super tough. They're having a really good year. If if you beat them at home, awesome. You go into their place and beat them, even better. But if you lose, hey, you know what? Not the worst loss in the world. They're 8th in RPI and they have 30 wins already. Not terrible. But those types of teams, the Troys, the Alabamas, the Cal Polys, they're the outliers to all of this. I think Coastal, because of recency, they're not necessarily considered I wouldn't necessarily consider them an outlier because they do this year in and year out. But every year we have these mid majors that schedule super tough, have a really good year, and then we're talking about them at the end of the year of like, hey, Indiana State for 2 years, right? Like they were at the top end, they scheduled pretty tough, and had really high RPIs and had pretty good postseason runs. But I think Coastal is uniquely positioned because they can play all these people, and everyone's willing to play them because they know it's not a negative to win or lose. Like it's a positive to win against them, but if you lose, it's not a negative because they're just as good. They just happen to be in the Sun Belt, not in the ACC or SEC.
I actually think they're better positioned geographically to schedule than even like a Troy, because I think the ACC needs to do a little bit more with the midweeks than the SEC does. So like, going to Coastal if you're Wake is a big deal to win. Like beating North Carolina on a neutral site is a big deal, or North Carolina beating Coastal on a neutral site is a big deal. And I think the ACC sometimes needs more help, especially when you get into not necessarily to get into the tournament. That's not what I'm talking about here. To host, to be a national seed, they need more help in the ACC than more so than the SEC, so they can position themselves to play Coastal on the road in a neutral site, even at home, because they know that that's going to help them. Whereas it's even harder for Troy because Auburn, Alabama, LSU, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, like all of them have like, oh well, it's the SEC, like. Doesn't matter what we do on a Tuesday because we're going to, insert other school here this weekend, and our RPI is going to go up, 8 spots no matter what we do.
Yeah, like Wake is playing Coastal right now, and they're up 9-5 in the 8th. That win moves the needle for Wake Forest. It sounds crazy, but that win could be the difference between Wake being a 2 and a 3 seed. Like playing that game. So, yeah, it's interesting. The other thing I want to bring up, a good friend of ours brought this up, is, and this is complete guesswork, but I think there's going to be more West Coast teams in this year than we've seen in recent years. Like we talked about at Poly, Irvine, UCLA's going to be in a position to potentially host Oregon State. Those are all teams that look like, firmly in. You got Grand Canyon, you got Arizona, you got Arizona State. Call them West Coast, even though, obviously they're not on the actual coast, but we'll call them in that Western region. Like there's more teams in that region this year that I think are definitely going to get in the tournament. Is the committee going to get lazy again and just not really seeded out a true like 1 through 64 and try to make the brackets as competitive as they can be, or you get rewarded for being really good, right? If you're say UCLA ends up say they just roll the Big Ten and they end up as a national seed somehow, are you gonna be lazy and not reward them and just throw Arizona and Arizona State in their regional because it's convenient? I really hope that doesn't happen, and I hope that they get to the point where, because it'd be kind of hypocritical to say, oh, well, Stanford can fly across the country 3 times to play or 4 times to play ACC teams, but we're not going to travel them for the NCAA tournament because it's more convenient. How do we feel about that? Is that something that we think is going to happen again?
So for everyone that has watched this show, and if you watched the last few years, my very, very, very honest opinion on teams west of the Texas line, we'll just call it. And I think those West teams have done a phenomenal job. They've had a phenomenal year. UCLA's had a great year. Oregon's done a great job. Like Arizona's done a great job. Obviously we talked about Cal Poly. My hope is that we are, and I think that we are, because, I watch a ton of college baseball, but when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I do is pop open my app and I'm like, all right, who can I watch at the earliest time possible and turn it on and get it cranked up. But what I've noticed in the last few weeks is, when you're watching normal TV, just regular TV, not the ESPN app, there's a ton of games on TV. And I think if the NCAA does that, what you just said, Andy, and just basically geographically puts Arizona, UCLA, Arizona State, and then insert WAC team here. Sorry, I just had an issue. I think it'd be a huge disservice to the entire tournament. We got teams flying. Kansas State's flying to Boston to play on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. Everybody can fly. Like, we're good. This has gotten to the point where there's enough money being made. There's enough games on TV. I mean, you see games on Sundays. There are some games on Sundays on ESPN, not even ESPN2, ESPN, just regular ESPN. There's games on Sunday. The SEC network has games on all the time. Like, we've gotten to the point where we can do that. Seed it the right way. Seed it 1 through 64, the whole way straight down the list. One goes here. 17 is the 17th seed is going to play this. In that is the 2 seed in the 16th bracket. Like, seed it the whole way. But and if you want to get convenient with some of it, like, I have no problem with the 4 seeds if you want to make it a little bit more geographically easy. But at least 1 through 32. At least 1 through 32. Let's just seed it the way it's supposed to be seeded, because it's such a big deal. It's so special that don't just seeding it, just being like, oh yeah, well, it's easy because Cal Poly can drive to UCLA. Well, we know that Cal Poly can drive to UCLA, but is Cal Poly the equivalent of the 2 seed with their resume to UCLA? And if not, then fly them to Clemson or fly them to wherever. I insert place here, but at least 1 through 32. Let's just seed it the right way. And again, I don't have an issue. I know it's not. We're not men's basketball. We're not football. 3 and 4 seeds. If you want to make it a little bit more geographic and it makes sense, do it that way. But at least 1 through 32, we got to seed straight through the line, because it's just not fair to those teams that are in that 1 through 32 range to not seed it the right way.
I agree 100%. I mean, to your point, like, you could have a team like Troy having to go to LSU's regional because it's convenient. You play your asses off all year and you get into a regional that your back's against the wall from game one. And not that, playing the 16 seed's going to be a ton easier, but as we mentioned, like, it's a lot harder to win at a place like LSU than it is, to go and travel and play at, UCLA. You're not talking the same atmosphere. You're not talking the same home field advantage. Like, that's part of the big thing of being able to host, is that, especially these SEC schools, like, if you get to host, the advantage isn't just in the seating. The advantage is that you're LSU and you get to play in front of 12,000 people that are all rooting for you. I mean, it's a wild advantage to have.
And I just think, like, the amount of money and NIL stuff and, with the budgets, like, and we've hit on all this stuff tonight. Everyone has spent enough money that I'm okay. All right. You want to say, hey, we can't afford to seed 1 through 64. That's fine. But we got to seed 1 through 32. It's not fair. It's just not fair. Those teams have had such good years. If you're one of the 32 best teams in the country, you have to be rewarded for that. And just to say, hey, Cal Poly, you're going to have to go to UCLA because it makes sense because you can drive there. We're not getting any closer to really advancing this sport if that's the way we're going to continue to do things. And I know people would argue that we should do 1 through 64. And I am one of those people that I think we should seed 1 through 64. But I also understand, the budgets, all that other nonsense. We got to seed 1 through 32.
Well, the wonder is with the amount of money that's coming in baseball, is that something that is feasible in the next 3? Is it feasible now? Is it feasible in 3, 4, 5 years of legitimately doing 1 through 64? Like I would prefer 1 through 64, but you know what I mean? Like, why is it? There's a lot of money that's being generated through baseball now. I mean, you just said it's on the SEC network. There's a rumor flying around that Sunday Night Baseball is gone and it's going to, they're going to take over and do college next year on ESPN instead of Sunday Night Baseball, which would be electric, but what is there going to is that feasible in the next 3, 4, 5 years? Like I think it's gotta be and it ultimately I could see you splitting hairs regionally on 4 seeds, but at the end of the day, why can't you fly Team 64 to Oregon State if they're the 1 seed? You know what I mean? They've already done stuff like that. I mean, Columbia went out to Corvallis 3 or 4 years ago. They've already done it. What's to say you can't take Team 64 and fly them to the West Coast or down to Texas or LSU or Arkansas? Come on, it's not that big of a deal. Now, logistically, I know what that looks like. However, I'm just saying from a money standpoint, 1 through 64, then we have as true a tournament as we're going to get, which is what I think as fans, everyone would really like. Right? You get to actually see the best, we can legitimately be like, all right, it's 1 through 64, it's seeded. This is what it looks like. Go. Instead of sometimes where you get those fringe 2 seeds like you're talking about, and it's damn, they're up against, they should have been a 2 seed. They were a borderline host. They should have been a 2 seed in the 16 regional instead of the 3 because it was convenient for them flying or driving wise to go there. And that, they were up against it from that standpoint where maybe they, as a 2 seed, they sneak out of that 16 regional. And now all of a sudden they can go play you're going to play in the 1, but what are you going to do?
No, I think you're 100% right. The 3 of us know we've worked in athletic departments and have an idea of, some of the answers. I don't disagree with anything you just said. I'm 100% on board with it. I just hope we can start maybe with 1 through 32, and the fact that we went from not knowing to 1 to 16, I think it's a good starting point, right? We went to that 2 years ago or last 2 years ago, and 2 years ago, and I think now I think it's time. All right, let's ease our way into 1 to 32, and and then and then again, I don't think anyone's saying that you're wrong. The way to feed this whole thing is 1 to 64. It's very simple. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. I don't think anyone that really watches college baseball would argue against that.
Couldn't agree more. Any closing thoughts? Anything to keep an eye on here?
I think for me, and I'm a little bit of an SEC junkie. I've kind of turned into that, in the last few years. How many teams get to 13 wins? Kind of what we talked about earlier, when me and Keith went back and forth with it. How many teams can get to, 13? I think Texas A&M is a really cool story. It's funny, they get no hit and run ruled, on Friday or Thursday night, I think it was, against Tennessee. And they're all but left for dead. I would say that most people that are Texas A&M supporters were probably keeping a close eye to Friday to see if Michael Early was going to lose his job mid-year. I think that was a very realistic, thing. If they go and get their doors blown off twice against Tennessee, there's a possibility that he gets off the plane and he doesn't have a job. And that's crazy, and it's crazy because I think it's a really, really, really good thing for our sport. It shows the support. It shows the level of importance to win. I'm not saying I would agree with that because I coached and I did this for a living for a long time, and I would never want someone to lose their job based off of 30 games into a season or 35 games into a season. But I think at that level, there was a realistic possibility that he was getting off the plane back in Texas and he was not going to have a job if they got pounded twice. And they do the opposite and they give it to Tennessee twice. They pound Mississippi State 3 times, scoring 8 runs in the ninth on Sunday, and they're right back in the mix. I mean, they couldn't be more squarely in the mix. I'll put it that way. So I think
they're scary right now.
I mean, you don't want to play them.
They look like the number 1 team the last 7 games they've played.
The crazy part with them too is, and I know we talked about this a few weeks ago with one of our good friends. Their offense was always what they were going to live on, but they pitched it and you remember this better than me. I think they were what were they, 3rd or 4th in the SEC through the first month of the SEC play in pitching.
Yeah, and particularly their starting pitchers were top of the food chain.
They were, they were super high. They couldn't hit themselves out of a wet paper bag.
And all we talked about all offseason was, while we're at go through the list. Early's a hitting guy. They're gonna mash. And it was nah, we actually can't pitch. We can pitch, but we can't hit. And now it's we might have figured this thing out. And they're 6-9. Basically, all they have to do is, and we talked about this earlier, all they have to do is just be the same team they were the first half, and they're probably in. And the team that we thought we were getting, and the team that played the first half was garbage. And they just got to do that again. Which is crazy to me.
Well, I opened with it being my biggest disappointment. And not more or less for these reasons. You can, at least in my mind, they're not mutually exclusive. You could be a big disappointment to this point, starting as the number 1 overall team that we all raved about and being in this position. But they're still in a position right now where they can go out and make a legit run at this. It'll lessen the disappointment, obviously. But I think this is also why we love this game and why baseball is so cool. I mean, I don't know Michael Early. He seems like a phenomenal human being, but they were calling for that guy's head. You're 100% right. If they got their doors blown off in Tennessee, it was going to be in Shrek when they show up with the pitchforks and just looking to run him out of town.
At the airport,
and they turn around and they won that game, and in our group chat it was they just saved his job. And then they win, they blow the doors off of South Carolina. It's this is not terrible. This is the team that we were expecting. And I think the SEC, I've become a little bit less of a junkie than you are, but I just think Andy talked about earlier, the swings in that conference can be so wild. You have 1 or 2 bad weekends and all of a sudden you're holy crap, we were sitting in 3rd and now we're in 9th because we had 2 bad weekends. And ultimately it doesn't ding you from the opportunity of getting into the tournament, but when you start talking hosting a regional or being a national seed and hosting supers, that's a huge swing. And I think it's impressive what they've done. I think I'm interested to see what happens what plays out in the Big 12, because I think West Virginia has done a really good job. Obviously, at this point, they're 30-4. TCU's been playing great baseball. Arizona is having another good year, so I'm interested to see what kind of shakes out in that conference. The Big Ten, again, I don't know what to expect. I think it's just like Pac-12 went west in the Big Ten, which is a bizarre thing to think about. My sneaky pick in Penn State's not having a terrible year. They're 22-12, 10-8 in conference, like sitting in the middle of the pack. So interested to see how that conference continues to shake out. But I think the one thing, and I'd be remiss to not bring this up as a former high-end academic coach. The dude from Yale, who's leading the country in ERA with like a .19,
it's a freshman,
is absolutely absurd at this point in the year. Like, I don't care what conference you're playing in, where you're pitching, what you're doing. Like, if you have a .19 ERA right now and leading the country, you are shoving it every time you go out there. And I just think that I would be remiss not to at least mention something of the nature from an academic standpoint, but just from we talked a lot more about teams and not people tonight, but that is an absurd stat on April 15th that you're pitching at a point.
If you're a 5 assistant, to stop hitting them up. It's not going anywhere.
Nope. But
I have insider information. He ain't going anywhere. Stop hitting them up. Don't waste your time. You're all good.
It's absurd. Think about that. 0.19. Like that's literally, and this is the coach's dream. Like, you just take the baseball and you hand it to him, and you're like, "Hey, we'll see you after the game."
Head to the office and put your feet up.
I'm just gonna go hang out in the third base box and
let me know if you need anything.
But no, I think
I'll be in my office.
That kid's absurd. But I think some of the things the mid-major stuff, I'm sure we'll cover as we get towards the end of the year. But, I think there are some good teams in the big, St. John's is having a really good year. UConn and Xavier's having a great year. The Patriot League seems to be a little bit more they're all equal this year, which I think is an interesting thing for that league. So, and our Fighting Red Foxes, are sitting middle of the pack here, Andy. So we'll see what we can do the back half of this year for the Mighty Foxes. But those would be my takeaways going into at the midway point. I'm excited to kind of see what shakes out over the next 4 or 5 weeks, because this is meaningful baseball, and I feel like if you haven't watched college baseball yet, now's the time to dial in, because every weekend from here on in matters in a lot of these conferences. So dial in and see some serious baseball being played over the course of the next couple weeks.
Yeah, real quick. I'm
going to go one more. Can I go one more?
Yeah, go ahead.
If you're an AD, or if you're just listening to this podcast and you're watching, don't be scared of hiring a stud assistant coach. Don't be scared of it. I think one of the things we've seen, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, and these guys are rock stars that are head coaches. Tony's a rock star. Wes Johnson, rock star. Schloss is phenomenal. These guys are awesome. Don't be scared to hire the assistant. These guys are such good coaches. It means more now to be a really, really, really good coach because of the portal, because of the culture that you can establish. It means even more now than it did 10 years ago when all three of us were doing this, to be a freaking stud of a head coach. And so many guys get overlooked because they don't have quote unquote head coaching experience. They don't have, whatever, pro experience. If somebody rocks your world in an interview, hire him, because the odds are that dude's going to turn your program into a star. And in this landscape, more than anything, players, if you're listening, go play for a dude that's a stud. Just, if somebody wows you so much on your visit, on the phone, go do it. because it's so important right now. And Andy hit on this earlier. We've seen it. All these guys, you just go through the list. We just roll down right down the RPI list. They're all studs. They all been stud assistants. Go do it.
Yeah, 100%. And we're going to guarantee you're going to see somebody try to hire a big name head coach. You know, they either were retired or they're going to try to go to pro ball, and it ain't going to work. When you've got super talented, hungry assistants that are proven in terms of finding players, establishing culture, and no, I agree with you. Quick note on the Omen kid, and I'm glad you brought him up, Keith, because it's awesome in so many ways. I think it's worth noting that it's not bells and whistles. Like, it's power stuff. It's 92 to 96. It's a breaking ball. It's composure. It's fastball up, down, in, out. I mean, I watched him throw against Columbia, and anybody who knows anything about college baseball knows that Columbia on every single weekend is a bear to handle offensively. Incredibly well coached, talented offensive players. They have a plan. They're tough. They grind out at bats. And this kid was just beyond impressive. It's really cool to see a kid with that kind of talent playing in the Ivy League. And I think it speaks to kind of what you're saying, Jonathan, about go where you feel really good about the people. Because if you shine and you're really good, it doesn't really matter what uniform you have on. It doesn't matter in the long run. Like, you need to go somewhere where you can play. You need to go somewhere where you can compete. And if you do it with good people. So, yeah, I mean, I think you guys kind of covered most of what I was going to get at. I'm just excited to see how this is going to play out. Like, I think you have some mid-major teams that I hope they're able to keep up what they're doing. You know, the UTSAs, the Western Kentuckys. Like, I want to see those teams in the tournament. I think they're fun to watch. I think they've got some personality. I think they've got some serious talent. And I want to see them in that regional setting. So I hope that some of those mid-majors are able to keep it going. And yeah, it's going to be a good stretch here for the last 5 or 6 weeks. Excited to watch some baseball. And we'll definitely bring this group back together before the conference tournament starts. And maybe we'll make a fleeting effort at picking who we think is going to end up in Omaha this time. I'm not sure how well we did the first time around.
Keith's got the records. I don't have any records. Keith's got all the records for us, so he's going to hold us accountable.
We're to be completely honest, there's only 1, 2. There's really A&M. All three of us had A&M.
Yeah, but I wouldn't count A&M out right now.
No. I'm just saying from like iffy picks. A&M, just right today. A&M is an iffy pick by all three of us. Andy and I had Wake, which is iffy right now. Andy and I had UVA.
Oh, that one kills me.
Oklahoma State. And the only other one is Duke that Andy had. But the rest are all, I mean, Arkansas, Tennessee, Florida State, Georgia, LSU, Florida. I mean, Arizona's on there, but Arizona has, they're having a good year. Like, that's not out of the realm of possibilities.
Florida in the iffy category, because right?
You had Florida, but
Tennessee also had too much to drink last year when they won the
But I don't think.
What are you going to listen to me? Like, come on.
To our point earlier, though, like Florida, I wouldn't be shocked if we look up in 3 weeks and Florida's, back in the conversation of being a host, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, like this, right now, yeah, I'll give you iffy, but I don't think it's, I wouldn't put them in the same as like Oklahoma State. Yeah. That's all.
All right, fair enough.
All right. Well, we'll do this again soon. Jonathan, you're the man. Thank you for coming. Everybody, thank you for listening.
I appreciate you letting me get on here and chop it up with you. So,
hell yeah. Welcome anytime. We'll have you back soon. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Tune in next week. Thank you for listening this week. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and smash that like button for us. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, as well as Spotify. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at EMD Baseball. If you want to find out what me and Keith do to help families and players navigate the recruiting process, go ahead and check us out on emdbaseball.com. Take a few minutes to check out our new online academy. I promise you'll get some good information out of that. Thanks again for listening. Check in with you next week.